The one with the evil orthodontist is a pretty fun episode of Friends. This is the 20th episode of the first season, and we have two main narratives going on here. The first is Rachel and some involvement with Barry and Mindy, and the second is Chandler and a potential romantic love interest. I'm not going to spoil these narratives, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will just talk a little bit about what I thought. This one I find is not necessarily one of the funniest episodes. That doesn't mean that it's dull or that I didn't find it exciting, but I didn't find it to be laugh out loud funny. There were a few Joey moments, which is usually the case. Even where episodes are not hilarious, usually Joey will say or do something that I find really amusing, and that is definitely the case here. Although, we do have one moment in this that I love, and it's when there is a crossword puzzle, and Phoebe says that the answer is radiator. It's too long, so she proposes radiator. And unfortunately, I often call radiators radiators as a side effect of having seen this episode many, many times over the course of about 15, just over 15 years. And by that I mean 18 years, because time flies. So that for me is actually a very special moment that I just love and makes this episode brilliant. Chandler, first of all, is very easy to deal with. We definitely see that he has a lot of issues with relationships. He becomes very needy and is desperate for this woman to phone back. But there are issues with the phone itself, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. That one I like because we definitely, for not the first time, but really for the first time as a prominent plot line, we get to see Chandler's issues with relationships, his attitudes towards women, and a hint at potential commitment issues as well. And it's quite nice to see Chandler taking something a bit seriously for once, because up until this point he's been pretty typically flippant. But finally we get to see a side of him where there's something that he actually wants, and he cares enough to become obsessed about it. So I like that side of it. The other side, of course, we have Barry and Mindy and Rachel's antics with Barry, and what Mindy might or might not know. And I think the scene in the coffee shop is absolutely brilliant. Also, side note, the navy blue, I think it's a sweatshirt that Rachel is wearing in that scene, I absolutely love it. I know that's not important to my enjoyment of the episode, but let's face it, Rachel's outfits are iconic. That one is one of my favourites. But that scene between Rachel and Mindy I thought was very moving, very heartfelt. What immediately followed kind of annoyed me a little bit, and it always does whenever I watch this episode. Mindy's attitude and the way she approached things, I think, could have been a lot different. So that side of it is not the way I would have wanted things to go. But that's my personal opinion, and of course that does give us, how do I say this without spoiling the episode, that does give us the Pepto-Bismol dress. That is something that, that may not have happened the way I wanted it to, but it leads on to greater and better things. So I really enjoy this episode, particularly like the fact that we get a bit more focus on Chandler from a more serious perspective. Sure, it's not the funniest episode of all time, but I find it to be very enjoyable. Quite refreshing to have one that's not just all about Ross and Rachel. Ross does, of course, have his moments when Rachel's talking about Barry. That's obviously not completely taken away from this. It's an enjoyable episode. I don't think that the one with the evil orthodontist is ever going to be my favourite, but certainly it's one that I think is enjoyable. Directed by Peter Bonerz. Of course, we have Mitchell Whitfield appearing as Barry and Jennifer Grey as Mindy. And yeah, never going to be one of my favourites, but never one that I'm going to skip. It's still an enjoyable episode.